Day 4 of chaos, streets burning, curfews ignored. Tanzania's government is scrambling to contain a storm that's no longer just political, it's personal. Because when a president starts calling foreign leaders for help, you know the crisis has crossed the line.
It's Tanzania's most serious political crisis in decades.
This crowd of protesters singing Tanzania's national anthem didn't want to vote in Wednesday's general elections.
But how did one of East Africa's most stable nations spiral into this kind of turmoil? Tonight we're unpacking the truth behind the protests shaking Tanzania. The blackout, the rumors, the power struggle, and the desperate phone calls that could redefine the region. It didn't start with gunfire. It started with silence, the kind that comes before a system cracks. For months leading up to the elections, tension was building in quiet corners. Opposition leaders disqualified, journalists disappearing, and voices critical of the ruling party muffled one by one. At first, people hoped it was just politics as usual. Tanzania had always been seen as the calm sibling in East Africa. Steady, predictable, rarely in the headlines. But beneath the surface, the country was simmering.
Presidential candidates from the two biggest opposition parties were barred from running. Demonstrators in Dar es Salaam, the largest city, and several other towns and cities didn't accept it.
Protests in towns and cities against what were described as sham elections, from which opposition leaders were banned.
They ransacked several polling stations and set some on fire.
And these demonstrators have had enough, burning pictures of their president.
Whispers spread online about corruption, inflation, and deep frustration with the ruling party, Chama cha Mapinduzi, which has held power since independence. Even supporters of President Samia Suluhu Hassan, once praised as a refreshing, moderate face after Magufuli's hardline years, began to question whether anything had truly changed. And then came the election. When polls opened, hope and fear shared the same space. Voters lined up under heavy police presence, their phones buzzing with rumors that ballot boxes were already secured before anyone had voted. Hours later, social media went dark. Twitter, Facebook, even WhatsApp were restricted. By the time the first unofficial results started leaking, everything had gone silent, except for the shouting on the streets. Protesters claimed the results were rigged. Security forces moved in fast. In Dar es Salaam, Arusha, and Dodoma, the night sky filled with the crack of tear gas canisters and the glow of burning debris. For many, that was the moment they realized this wasn't going to be another peaceful dispute.
The president should get out of the way. We have been silent for so long. What have we been doing?
This person narrates as protesters advance towards the police. Videos showing injured protesters were shared on social media until mobile internet was switched off. It was calmer where President Samia Suluhu Hassan voted in the capital Dodoma,
with claims that hundreds have been killed after police opened fire.
The police are responding to the protests with tear gas and live bullets. We are urging them to exercise restraint and facilitate the right to protest in Tanzania.
And while the capital tried to sleep through the noise, something even bigger was about to happen. By day 3, the situation was spinning out of control. Dozens injured, power outages across major cities, and foreign journalists turned away at the airport. Then came the leaks. According to intelligence briefings later obtained by regional outlets, President Suluhu Hassan made urgent phone calls to Kenya's President William Ruto and Uganda's Ruto Museveni, pleading for support to stabilize the borders and contain the chaos. On paper, it was security coordination. In reality, it was a lifeline. Tanzania's neighbors responded cautiously. Ruto offered to coordinate humanitarian support. Museveni reportedly suggested cross-border patrols. But the symbolism was heavy, a president calling outsiders to help calm her own people. And as those calls went out, the protests grew even louder. Back inside Tanzania, the lights were fading, literally and digitally. Journalists were told to stand down. News outlets received warnings about inciting public disorder. Camera crews vanished from the streets. The only images reaching the world were shaky clips from smuggled smartphones, clips that told a story no press release could hide. In those videos, you could see terrified crowds scattering as gunfire echoed. You could see smoke rising from storefronts and hospitals overwhelmed with the injured. And you could hear the chants, "CCM must go." International NGOs began confirming what everyone feared. Civilians were being detained, beaten, and in some cases worse.
Opposition parties say previous elections were rigged and they've been calling for electoral reforms. They didn't happen. The leader of the main opposition party, Tundu Lissu, is in jail on trial for treason, and most of the officials of his party, Chadema, are in hiding.
There have been calls for fresh elections and for the army to take over, though for now the army is backing the president, describing demonstrators as criminals.
Sort of a coronation. So Samia is trying to reinstate herself in the reins of power without being elected by the people.
But while the government silenced journalists, they couldn't silence the internet forever. The blackout only fueled curiosity, and soon, hashtags calling for global attention started trending across East Africa. And that's when the world began to pay attention. Within days, major human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the UN Human Rights Office, released coordinated statements condemning the violence. Reports claimed dozens of casualties and hundreds detained without trial. Then came the images from across the border. Hospitals in Migori County, Kenya, confirmed that at least 25 Tanzanians had been admitted for treatment, 6 with gunshot wounds. It was no longer just a Tanzanian story. Under pressure, Suluhu's administration released a calm, carefully worded statement calling for restraint and national unity. But on the ground, it was too late. The people weren't listening anymore. The ruling party, Chama Cha Mapinduzi, stayed silent. No press briefings, no accountability. And that silence said everything. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand Tanzania's political DNA. Since independence, CCM has ruled uninterrupted. Every president, every parliament, every major policy has run through its grip. Even Suluhu, who rose to power as the nation's first female president, was seen as a possible reformer. She lifted some restrictions on the media and opened dialogue with the opposition. But critics say her government soon fell back into the same patterns: arrests, censorship, and surveillance. Analysts now believe the protests aren't just about election results. They're about decades of bottled-up frustration finally exploding. The opposition says Tanzania has reached a point of no return. The government says it's just a temporary disturbance, but the truth might be something far more dangerous. A fracture that can't easily be sealed. As the streets cool and the smoke clears, a question hangs in the air. What now? The UN is pushing for an inclusive dialogue. Regional leaders are calling for mediation. But inside Tanzania, trust has already been broken. Once people see blood on their streets, speeches about unity don't heal the wounds. And for Suluhu, every decision from here on is a gamble. Show strength and risk backlash, or show weakness and risk collapse. Behind closed doors, her party knows that if this unrest spreads to the rural strongholds that built CCM's power, the entire structure could fall apart. That's why those late-night phone calls matter so much. They weren't just about security. They were about survival. Tanzania stands at a crossroads. On one side, a government fighting to restore control. On the other, a population refusing to back down. Whether this becomes a rebirth or a breakdown, depends on what happens next and who the world decides to listen to. Because if there's one thing this crisis has made clear, it's that silence can no longer hide the storm. So what do you think? Is Tanzania witnessing the end of its political dynasty? Or will the ruling party tighten its grip even harder? Let me know your thoughts below. And if you want to stay updated as this story unfolds, make sure to subscribe, because the next chapter is already being written.